ومن إلى رحمته المفر ومن إليه يلجأ المضطر ويا قريب العفو يا مولاه ويا مغيث كل ما دعاه.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So last week we talked about how the objective, inshallah ta'ala, of us being able to properly understand what it means to be a Muslim in the modern world depends on the independence of thought. It depends on our ability to think, and not just think, but to able to think independently, right? And not to think from the margins, not to think on the basis of the periphery, but be able to think and ask critical questions. So module 2 here, we call the structure of thought. And the objective today is two things. One, to provide the students with an explanatory framework needed to critically engage with Islam and modernity. In other words, we want to look at a mode or a level of thinking that allows us to understand the reality of Islam and the reality of modernity. Basically, how do we dig deeper when we are trying to understand Islam or when we are trying to understand modernity? In other words, and this is on your slide, the idea is not to seek out new information. The idea is to arrange what we already know. So what's the difference between information and concepts, or information and the way we arrange that information? Information can be shared by, for example, the history of secularism or the history of civil rights. Okay, this is information. It is raw data. It is information that is available to anybody, right? The way in which we arrange and approach that information is what we refer to as our concepts. Okay, so for example, all Muslims know that there are ahkam, fiqhiyya, right? And all Muslims know that there are aqa'id. There is a belief in Allah Azza wa Jal. There is a belief in prophethood. There is a belief in the angels. There is a belief in al-qada wal-qadr. So we all have that information, but how do we arrange it? So what is the place of fiqh in relation to our belief in the prophethood? What is the relationship between our belief in the angels and our belief in God, and our belief in Allah Azza wa Jal? Similarly, what is the relationship between the Islamic Aqidah, which we already know, and the question of Zawaj Madani, the question of feminism? What is the relationship between Aqidah, the Islamic Aqidah, and all of these questions? So again, we are not seeking new information, but only to arrange what we already know, i.e. we want to introduce a method for thinking. The second thing I want to try to demonstrate is that metaphysics, which means al-ghaybiyat, metaphysics means aqidah, is the grounds of all thinking. Meaning that the basis for your thinking, whether it is Islamic thinking, secular thinking, atheism, scientism, whatever it is, the basis for any thinking is always metaphysics. Aqidah is inescapable. And why is this important? Because we tend to not make links between, or we tend to not have the ability to link, for example, our day-to-day life, day-to-day issues with the Islamic Aqidah or with metaphysics. When you think of, when I use the word metaphysics, immediately what comes to mind is abstract ideas, like you think Plato, Aristotle, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina, al-ghaybiyat, philosophy, but that's not the case. The reality is that our aqidah, our metaphysics shapes our day-to-day thoughts and shapes our day-to-day actions. So to give you an example, to illustrate this, and I think I used this example, I don't know if I used this example here or if I used it in class, but suppose that you have a Christian friend, Jewish friend, a Hindu friend, whatever, and you decide, for example, to go to, you're all visiting the United States, and you decide to go to McDonald's. Okay, something very mundane, something very basic, and you're walking into a McDonald's, has nothing to do with religion, and supposedly you would think has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with ethics, You're not going to McDonald's to talk about morality, to talk about abortion. You're not going to talk about Nietzsche. You're not talking about Immanuel Kant. You're not going there to talk about Khilafah. You're not going to talk about Iman. You're just going to eat, have lunch. Okay. And so you walk in and you have your everyday world. You have your cashier, you have your tables, and you have your menu. In other words, the Muslim, the Christian, the Jew, and the Hindu, they all share the same material reality, the same objective reality. And then they look at the menu, and the Christian will say, okay, for example, I will have a number 2. Let's say a number 2 is bacon, egg, and cheese. Okay, bacon, pork. The Hindu will say, well, I can't have any of these because I'm a vegetarian. So I'm going to just have fries, for example. So I'm just going to order side order. The Muslim will say number 6 because it's a fish burger and the meat is not halal. The Jew will say, okay, same thing, I'm going to have the fish burger. And you might even have another friend who's like an activist, like a communist, and he just leaves McDonald's altogether because he says this is capitalism and whatever. So notice what happened here. Something as simple and as mundane as what you order at McDonald's or at the restaurant is inevitably defined by your aqidah. Why? Take the example of the Muslim. So the Muslim sees that he has an option between beef and fish. He cannot eat beef. He cannot eat this type of beef because he is ordained and he's obligated to eat halal meat. He's obligated to eat halal meat because the Quran says so. He believes in the Quran because he believes that this is revealed by God. And he believes that this is revealed by God because Muhammad ﷺ is the messenger of God and he has rational evidence to believe such. And because he believes that there is a messenger of God, he must assume that there is a creator, and he must assume that the relationship between him and his creator is not just a relationship that God created man, but that God is also the sovereign lawmaker of man. So we go from something as simple as what do I eat, what do I order at McDonald's or whatever it is, all the way back to your metaphysics. And this is something, the more linked you are and the more conscious you are of your aqeedah on a day-to-day basis, the more it drives you. So this is why, for example, when even at a very visceral level, even at a very gut level, when a Muslim, for example, sees pork, what do they feel? They feel disgusted, right? But when a Muslim, for example, passes by a bank, right, they don't feel disgusted, even though the Prophet ﷺ says that, or for example, just to illustrate the relationship between the aqeedah and between your thoughts and even your attitudes and your visceral emotions. If you were to pass by, as a Muslim, if you were to pass by a brothel, right, a prostitution house, immediately you would feel disgusted. But for example, when we pass by a bank, we don't necessarily feel this, even though the Prophet ﷺ says that a bank or the institutions which engage in the riba are 27 times worse in the eyes of Allah than a brothel, right? So whether the link between your metaphysics and your day-to-day life is weak or strong, at the end of the day, our actions are guided by our metaphysical presuppositions. And we'll explain more what I mean by metaphysics. So in other words, if we want to truly understand secularism, if we want to understand atheism, if we want to understand liberalism, if we want to understand Islam, we must begin at the level of metaphysics. So any questions so far? واضح? Okay. Why also the reason I just gave you of why you should think about metaphysics, start with metaphysics, it can be used for purely academic purposes. It can be used for research purposes. But what does that have to do with us as Muslims, right? Islam, in and of itself, actually obligates us to think and to begin thinking at the level of metaphysics. Why? Because the Islamic aqeedah, and I will explain this at length, inshallah, when we talk about Iman, the Islamic aqeedah is not a set of private beliefs. It is not we do not hold that al-Iman refers to a set of opinions that a Muslim holds. We believe that al-Aqidah and we believe that al-Iman, for example, Arkan al-Iman, is a form of awareness, a form of al-Wa'i. And awareness is basically to be conscious, recognize, and know a situation or a fact, to know a reality, to understand the reality of something, and not just to believe it. So awareness is when you understand the reality of something. For example, if I want to understand the reality, the biological reality of man, I cannot watch a cartoon, right? I would have to engage with biology. I would have to engage with certain instruments to understand the reality of man. So when we speak of al-wa'i, we mean واقع الشيء، فهم الشيء على حقيقته، فهم الشيء بطريقة مطابقة لواقع الشيء. So I'll give an example. If I said that, for example, Ukht Marwa is standing up, okay? This is a statement that is not in accord with reality. غير مطابق للواقع. Where if I said Ukht Marwa is sitting down, Ukht Marwa is sitting down, هذا كلمة واعية لأنه مطابقة للواقع. It conforms to reality. So when Allah Azza wa Jal tells us to believe al-Iman, al-Iman does not mean merely believe that there is no God but Allah, or say that there is no God but Allah. But Allah Azza wa Jal says في القرآن فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, meaning that don't just say it, but you have to come to know it. In other words, you must keep thinking, and you must constantly think and reflect until you have that eureka moment, until you have that epiphany, until you have that realization that, okay, now I know that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. So this is critical. The Aqidah for us is not a set of private opinions or private set of beliefs. The Aqidah is not what Muslims believe. It is not subjective. For us, Aqidah equal awareness. Awareness of what? Of reality. And so this is why we said here, and I mean the ultimate form of awareness that you can have is basically the awareness of your foundations, the awareness of what is the essence of existence, what is the foundation of existence, why is there something rather than nothing, and what is the origin of time, what is the origin of space. So for example, if I told you, when how there's always these campaigns, for example, breast cancer awareness. What does breast cancer awareness mean? Or political awareness? It means like, for example, if there's a certain event, let's say the bombings in Sri Lanka, okay? We have information. We know that 310 people were killed. We have the facts, okay? Awareness refers to your ability to understand the origins, right? Of those, the origins and the factors that produced that event. Or for example, with breast cancer, what is breast cancer awareness? Like there's always advertisements and campaigns. How do people gain breast cancer awareness? Basically knowing the symptoms and the origins, right, before the breast cancer emerges. So awareness at the level of Iman refers to being aware about what are the foundations of our reality, what are the foundations of life, what is the foundations of the Qawn, of the cosmos. And that is inevitably the question of Allah Azza wa Jal, Wujudullah. And awareness is different than meditation. And I make this contrast because today many Muslims have this idea that Islam is a form of meditation. It is a form of yoga and therapy, and many of the New Age religions promote this idea of spiritual withdrawal, or this idea that you can withdraw from reality or withdraw from the world. And meditation is defined as your ability internally and mentally to create an altered state of mind or to escape a reality. The Aqidah as wa'i, aqid as awareness, does not teach us to escape reality. It tells us to understand the nature and the core and the foundations of reality, to penetrate reality at its deepest levels. And that's why, for example, Allah critiques the kuffar when He says, وَلَا يَعْلَمُونَ إِلَّا ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. This is a critique in the Quran. Whereas the believers, because they have tafakkur and tadabbur, they are able to reach the essence of existence, the foundation of being, which is Allah Azza wa Jal. right? And this is what is meant when we say Allahu al-Haq. Allahu al-Haq, not just in terms of His existence, but that He is the foundation of existence, that He is the foundation of being, and that He is the foundation of morality. And this is why our fuqaha, they for example, Ibn Taymiyyah is remarkable in some of his texts, absolutely remarkable. His book on al-aql and al-naql, ودرء التعارض بين العقل والنقل. But he has a wonderful passage where he says that the gate to witnessing the greatness of God, deep thinking is the gate to witnessing the greatness of God, and the scene of sovereignty are open before Him. And so the only way you can truly witness the greatness of God is through deep thinking, al-tafkir al-amiq. And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says in his book Al-Fawaid, which I recommend everybody read, Kitab al-Fawaid, he says, deep thinking is the beginning of and the key to all good. It is the best function of the heart and the most useful to it. So the heart here, kinayatan an al-aql, this idea that the believer must begin with deep thinking. And the opposite of, when you say deep thinking, al-ta'aqqul, in Arabic, the opposite of a ta'aqqul is not faith. For example, in English, when we say faith and reason, or we say reason versus faith. In Arabic, the opposite of al-aql or ta'aqqul is al-naql, which means to imitate. So the whole corpus of the Quran and the whole corpus of these fuqaha, whether they were from the Asha'ir or the Mu'tazila or the students of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah or Ibn al-Qayyim, was that al-Iman must begin with the aql, and not just any form of aql. It must begin with deep thinking, al-tafkir al-amiq, tafkir which looks beyond the surface of things. And for us, this, for example, to put this in context, for example, thinking that goes beyond physical phenomena, right? Thinking that goes beyond the physical world that is presented to us, that goes beyond the limits and the boundaries of science, for example, and asks questions about the essence and the origins of things. طيب, what is the fruit of deep thinking and of al-wa'i? So we engage in this deep thinking, which we'll discuss when we talk about Islam. We engage in this deep thinking, and then we came to this realization, this wa'i, that God is Allahu al-Haq, or that there is a creator, and that this creator must be singular, and so forth. Now, this wa'i is what allows you to engage in witnessing, which is al-shahada. Witnessing, when we say ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah, al-shahada, this is very important. Shahada is different than saying something. To witness something is different than to state something. So witnessing in legal terms, right, means that witnessing is a person that declares as true what he or she has seen, heard, or knows. So for example, if, let's say there was a crime committed in Hamra, there was like a robbery, and I wanted to bring a witness to court to try to prove that the perpetrator was whoever, person X, okay? I cannot bring a witness, I cannot bring someone who has not seen or heard, right, the event take place. I cannot bring someone who has not witnessed the robbery. Similarly, we cannot say La ilaha illallah until we have witnessed La ilaha illallah. So here, the shahada, what we have to properly understand, that our shahada is the act of witnessing. It is the act, it begins with recognizing that Allah is one and that Muhammad is His messenger. And then the second part is that we testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is His messenger. So that's why, for example, in court, a witness is somebody who has two capacities. One, he knows something because he has witnessed it, and two, he can testify to it. He cannot testify to it unless he has witnessed it, i.e. awareness. Why? So literally, when we say the shahada, we are telling people that we have witnessed, that we have recognized that there's no God but Allah. You are testifying to something that you have experienced before, and witnessing can only come as the fruit of deep thinking and of al-wa'i. That's why Allah Jalla says, that's why, you know, the Quran says, the hadith says, "Kul man qal ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah." The shahada here again means witnessing and not just to state something. So this is why we have to think deeply about, this is why we have to think about thinking. This is why we have to know what is the structure of our thought and what is the relationship between metaphysics and the different levels of thinking. So on the slide, I think it's on the 8th slide, here we give the diagram of what are the different levels of thinking, right? So the first basic level of thinking is, here, this look. So the most basic level of thinking is our day-to-day life, okay? The day-to-day, everyday, concrete world. And we refer to this as totality. So our totality of everyday life. And then the second level is that of morality, then language, then epistemology, and then metaphysics. Yeah, sorry, and then I discussed a bit of the shahada here. So, I mean, I guess the issue with the shahada, the relationship between al-shahada and awareness is clear. So we can skip all the way until we get to what is totality, inshallah, which is this one here. Okay. So let's start off. We talked about metaphysics a bit, and we talked about wa'i, and we talked about shahada, and we talked about iman a bit. But now let's bring it all back to our day-to-day world, our totality. And at first, this will appear a bit abstract and complicated, but it will become more concrete as you move forward. A totality is essentially, you can think of the word totality as my world, al-alam, right? In a limited sense. A totality is the way you make meaning out of day-to-day objects, right? So Enrique Dussel, he explains this as follows. He says, and I'm going to explain this throughout the session, inshallah. The wood of the table appears when present to me as firewood. When in extreme cold, it is important not to die frozen than to use a table. It appears as a phenomenon wood, firewood, with a thing with sense, just as a wood desk would. Wood desk would, in a everyday manner, appear equally as a thing with sense. The sense which something has, on the other hand, never is a merely theoretical or abstract consideration. It always pertains to the everyday and is existential. It is wood as something integrated into for action. Okay, I think this is more confusing than explanatory. But to give you just to kind of give you the example of what he's talking about, okay? When I see, for example, a piece of wood, a surface that has 4 wooden legs, okay? I am not experiencing 5 abstract things, 4 legs and a surface. I am witnessing what? A table, okay? Why? Because I was able, through my day-to-day experience, through my experience of the everyday world, to link those 4 things with sense into what I perceive to be as a table. Now, let's say, for example, it was freezing cold and there was a blizzard, and I see 4 legs of wood, right? And I see a match. The first thing that would come to mind is not table, but firewood, right? Because again, I am linking it to my day-to-day experience and to my immediate need. معلومات السابقة. Or if I see, for example, okay, another example, if I see water, right? If I see a bottle of water and I am fasting, what comes to mind is something which is prohibited, Whereas if I'm stuck in a desert, for example, and I'm dying of thirst, when I see the water, what I think of is survival. If I am just having dinner and I see a cup of water, for me it is just a cup of water to wash down whatever I was eating and so forth. In other words, the way we attribute meaning to objects in the world, al-ashya, we're not here talking about people. The way we attribute meaning and value to objects in the world, whether it's a table, whether it's meat, whether it's anything, is based on the way we relate it to other parts of the world, right? Let me give a more, to explain this, let's move into like more complicated examples. So, as children, right, in child psychology, for the child, at the moment of inception, the world is limited to one relationship, which is what? One relationship. Today, for example, we live in a totality of many relationships. But what is the singular relationship that the infant is born into? Exactly, the mother-infant relationship. Okay, so it is a very narrow totality, and I mean, even for some psychologists, that even this relationship up until a particular age of time, it's a relationship between the infant and what the infant perceives to be some sort of object, or some sort of object for material sustenance. But of course, from an Islamic perspective, no, there is this proxemic relationship of rahmah and mawadda. But the point is that the relationship, the world of the baby is very, very narrow. And then as time progresses, the relationship, and I explain these in the notes, the relationship begins to expand. So then there's suddenly a brother, there is a sister, right? And then the world expands, and then suddenly there is a school teacher. So remember we talked about how things have meaning in relation to the world that we live in. They have meaning in relation to other things around us. They're never isolated. So for example, this child, say you send your 2 or 3-year-old, 4-year-old to school, and they have a school teacher named Karen, okay? And Karen for the child is the teacher, right? The missus. Now Karen for Karen's husband is Karen the wife. Karen for Karen's daughter is Karen the mother. And so Karen is one thing, but she has different meanings according to different worlds that are occupied by different people. Now what's interesting, just to kind of illustrate this, I forgot what they call this phenomenon, but you know, like children, when they see their teacher outside of school, let's say for example in the supermarket, they experience a sort of shock, right? Because things are out of place, because suddenly the world is disrupted. And I remember I used to have this, like, because I have to, the US, they have to wear a uniform, the gym teachers. And so I see my gym teacher every day at a particular time, let's say from 2 to 3, in a particular uniform, in a particular place, doing a particular function. He serves a particular function in my system, in my totality. And then suddenly I see him in like the supermarket, not in uniform, like just wearing whatever. And suddenly it's like, wait, what's happening? Like there's a disrupt, the child's world is disrupted, right? Precisely why? Because the totality, the meaning and value that he had attributed to the world, to that being, to that thing, which is the teacher or Karen or the gym teacher, is suddenly suspended and disrupted, right? So I don't want to go into this too much, and I think it's very straightforward. But basically the point is that we attribute meaning and value to things on the basis of our totality, the way we link things around us, and the way we are conscious of the way, for example, we relate to other human beings and whatnot. So I have some slides explaining this, but we can skip those. Those are just extra notes. We talked about, so each one of us occupies a particular totality. Our 2 or 3-year-old children have a certain totality, a certain world. You have a certain world, totality in mind. Other people, us in this room, we occupy different totalities and whatnot. And again, a totality here refers to the meaning and value that you give objects, right? The meaning and value that you give objects. And it does not refer to whether or not they exist, because this is something we can discuss later, but if you read the notes, it will become clear. But some people would have us, the misconception is that, well, okay, everything is subjective then. If the meaning and value that I give to an object or to a person depends on my totality, then this means that everything is relative and subjective. This is not true, because the idea is that we give meaning and value to things, but we already affirm that those things exist. In other words, those things exist independently of what we think of them. So this idea of relativism or nihilism collapses, but we can explain this in more detail, like when we talk about secularism and Nietzsche and whatnot. And then, of course, when we say that we give meaning and we give value to objects in the world, this is not necessarily purely on the basis of rational thought or on the basis of our subjectivity, right? But from an Islamic perspective, we give value to objects, people, and actions on the basis of al-wahy, on the basis of a revelation. And for us, this is crystal clear that the Quran the fuqaha have formulated this for us. And that's why we say, for example, again, as a response to the relativist, and how does this whole thing about totality and my gym teacher and Karen and water and table, how does this relate to revelation? Kind of jump forward is that in Islam we have three fundamental golden maxims, 3 fundamental rules. The first is that al-hukmu ala al-asl fi al-ashya' al-ibaha, that the default status, the original ruling, i.e. the meaning and value of an object, is al-ibaha, its neutrality, its permissibility. Al-asl fi al-af'al al-taqayyud bil-hukm al-shar'i. As for actions, the meaning and value of actions are determined by the shara. And then by extension, and I mean, this is not explicitly stated in the books of fiqh, but this is what I understood from Shaykh Taqi, rahimahullah, Taqiyuddin Nabahani, rahimahullah. Al-asl fi al-afkar التقيد في العقيدة أو انبثاقها عن العقيدة. And so then what about the value and meaning of ideas? Well, we relate it back to our metaphysics, the extent to which it relates to our metaphysics. So now let's kind of depack what I was saying about totality a bit more, okay? In terms of what does this have to do with our what does this have to do with our lives, our relationships and whatnot? Essentially, under the realm of totality, there are 3 types of relationships, 3 subsystems. This is in this slide here. Okay? The first is man-self relations. Meaning, and this is critical, meaning the relationship that you have with yourself. The relationship that you have with yourself. And this is called self-perception. Okay? علاقة الإنسان بنفسه أو تنظيم علاقة الإنسان بنفسه. And this is somewhat of an overlooked concept, because this form of relationship, because when we think of relationships, we tend to think of external relationships, my relationship with things that are external to me. But the Shara draws our attention to our relationship with ourself, the relationship between the aql and the nafs, the relationship between the ruh and the aql. Like constantly, it's very interesting that constantly the Quran addresses, for example, the relationship between man and his wife, man and his mother, man and the disbelievers, the believers and the non-believers, man and God. But it also discusses the relationship between man and himself, man and the nafs, which is in and of itself very, very significant, extremely significant, because what this means is that the concept of the self, the concept of the ana, the I, the that in Islam is fundamentally and radically different than the concept of the self in the West. the concept of the West, the concept of the I or the self means the ana. In the West, in modernity, is that there is this one rational, unitary being who always acts according to his reason or according to his rationality, and so forth. In Islam, the insan, the I is more complicated. The I, we can think of the I as having two hearts, metaphorically speaking, as having two modes of reasoning. The ghara is hajat on one hand, which propel him towards certain actions, and then the aql on another. And so there is this constant relationship between the two, this internal struggle within the I, within the self. But we'll talk about this again when we talk about Islam and whatnot. So first you have man-self relationships, relationship between man and himself, or man here refers to men and women, i.e. your self-perception. Man-object relations, which means my relationship between myself and objects, physical objects in the world, and this refers to material relations. So for example, natural resources, climate change, all of the phenomena which we discussed, and this will prove to be important because, for example, what is my relationship with nature, right? At-tabi'a. Is it a relationship of domination, a commonwealth, or is it a relationship of istikhlaf, a relationship of al-a'mar, which is again another topic. And then we have man-man relations. So this refers to political, economic, and social fields. And if you turn to the other section, for example, here S denotates the you as an individual, okay? And the A, B, C, N, and D, etc. are different fields that you live in. So for example, A is your family life, B is your political life, let's say, C is economic, D. So the idea is that you're always constantly in these different fields, right? You're always within these various man-to-man relations, man-woman relations. And we refer to these relations as politics, economics, social, and so forth. And the key is that you are never born. The idea is that, like in Western political theory, they have this thought experiment where they say that, we're trying to think of man as being born into a state of nature, and then he enters a social contract and he becomes civilized. Kind of like, remember with Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the harlot and whatnot. But in Islam, subhanAllah, the scholars, they never dealt with these hypothetical thought experiments, because man is always born into an existing set of relationships, right? You are never born into an abstract space. You are never born into a vacuum. You are born into a pre-existing political, economic, social, and family system. And that's how you get your name, right? You get your name precisely because you are born and you are embedded into that system. Now, I want to end with one thing, because the second topic is we get into the issue of metaphysics and epistemology. And I don't want to, because I want you to think and kind of digest what we talked about today. So today we're talking merely about our everyday life and our relationship at the horizontal level. Totality, which refers to man-self relationship, man-object relationships, and man-man relations. So these are all horizontal relations, right? These are all horizontal relationships. We have not yet spoken about the question of God, and we will see why. What we are discussing is what we can call temporal structures, temporal systems, worldly systems, customs, things that can always be changed. What do I mean by this? Any relationship, obviously, when you speak of a totality, we're speaking of, right, a set of relationships that are essentially subjective. Subjective in the fact that they could exist in one way or they can exist in another. But as for, does this mean that they should have an objective basis? Yes. But here, by subjective, I mean that it could be one way and it could be another. So what do I mean by that? if I were to say that my name could be Ali, or it could have very easily also been Ahmed, right? This is a possibility, okay? But what if I were to say that I could have existed and not existed at the same time? This is objectively impossible. So when we speak about temporal systems, when we speak about totalities, we are talking about systems that are constructed by men, whether it is on the basis of custom and tradition, or it is based on wahi, on the Quran and on the Sunnah. So here we are talking about temporal structures. Whereas when you talk about metaphysics, we are talking about the nature of reality. The nature of reality as it is, independently of the meaning that we give to it. For example, okay, in terms of what I mean by objective versus subjective, an apple, okay, has certain properties, right? An apple is constituted, I don't know, by, let's say, redness. It is constituted by a certain form and a particular seed and a certain chemical composition, physical composition. Okay, this is the essence of the apple. This is the objective nature of the apple. The meaning I give to it is different. It can be something I eat, something I make apple pie out of, something I throw, and so forth. So when we talk about metaphysics, we are talking about the nature of things as they are, independently of the meaning and value that we give to it. So what is the nature of our reality? What is the nature of the kawn? Is it a purely physical, material reality? Or is the kawn, for example, based on a duality of substances? You know, you have a material and immaterial nature. Does man have a soul, or is man constituted purely by neurons and protons and his physicality, for example? This is what we refer to as metaphysical questions, questions about the objective nature of man. And what we will see next week, or whenever you guys would like, is that at the end of the day, the way in which we shape our totality, and the way in which we shape the meaning that we attribute to things on a day-to-day level, i.e. value and meaning, is based on our metaphysics. It is based on the way we understand our relationship with God, our relationship with the cosmos, the way we understand, is reality, is nature made up purely of physical beings, or is there an immaterial consciousness or a human soul? That even these day-to-day meanings that we give to objects and value that we give to people is also grounded in metaphysics, and metaphysics is inescapable. So we'll discuss that in more detail, and then we'll talk about so then what is epistemology, what is knowledge, how do we gain knowledge of all these things, and so forth. And I just summarized, I pretty much summarized the slides, but you can read through the slides basically to get a more concrete idea of what I've been talking about today. And then I also have my slides. I also have the notes, my own personal notes for each slide, if you guys would like them. Here. So next week, inshallah, we'll go through metaphysics, epistemology, and aqidah, epistemology, and language, even to demonstrate that even the language that we speak is grounded in metaphysics, in aqidah. Language is grounded in our mafahim an al-hayat, our mafahim, our concepts of God, right? It's not grounded in linguistic relativism, as some people would have us think, or on purely science, abstract. Even language is based on our metaphysics. How do we name things? How do we carve things out of our reality? What does it mean to give a name to a particular object? We'll talk about this, inshallah.